Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video I wanted to talk a little bit about Liquitex Soft Bodied Acrylic paints. It just occurred to me that although I use these all the time in my own works, I've not actually done any YouTube videos on them, so I thought I would do that today. Now I need to start by saying I'm not sponsored in any way by Liquitex. This is a completely impartial review of my own experience of using these paints. Now, like a lot of you, when I first started painting, and this is what a lot of beginners do, is we start with watercolour paints, which I very much enjoyed using, and I still do a lot of watercolour painting, particularly over on Skillshare. So with that, they're very transparent, they're very easy to work with because you're using a lot, they're very fluid, is the word I was looking for. You can move them very easily around the paper because you're using all that water. So when I tried using acrylic paints, the ordinary heavy-bodied acrylic paints, I found for me that they weren't movable enough. And I don't use oil paints. I do use the water-based oil paints, or should we say water mixable oil paints to use the correct term. But I don't use traditional oil paints because of my asthma and the way that all the solvents, etc., affect my chest. So over time you try various things and you try different mediums, and it's always a good idea to try different mediums because your style can alter over time and you can find what you like and what suits your style. And I tried different things. Like I said, I found the ordinary acrylics were a little bit too static for me, and sometimes I felt they were a bit too in your face, too bright, and that just comes down to me mixing my colours better partly, but I think some of that was because I was used to working with watercolours, and you've not got that same intensity of colour the minute you put your brush to the paper that you do with your acrylic paints. So anyways, cutting a long story short, really, I'm rambling a little bit here. I decided to try these soft bodied paints at some point, and I really like them because they do move, they do flow a lot more easily than the ordinary acrylics. And although you don't get the same impasto techniques, so perhaps if you're wanting impasto and to apply the paint very thickly, you may not like these. For someone who's used to using watercolours and who wants to, move things and mix things on the paper, you can get some really lovely techniques with these. So you will see I do add a touch of water sometimes, but it's not really to mix the paint or to make the paint thinner. It's more just to help the brush flow and keep my brush nice and moist, really. So I'm not adding a lot of water to them. The only time I add water to them is when I'm doing a glaze over the top of painting that's underneath. So I should have said the pad that I'm using here is it's an oil paper canvas pad, and it's gummed all the way around. That's why it's not taped down. I did draw a little margin on there, and I'm just doing a sketch, and this was more or less out of my head from a walk the other day where the light was constantly changing and the clouds were coming across and covering up some of the distant fells, and like I said, the light was changing a lot, so I wanted to try and catch some of that, and I'm going to make this into a larger painting at some point, a similar kind of theme. So I only used 4 colours really, or 5 colours should I say. I used French Ultramarine, I used Alizarin Crimson, and I used Turner's Yellow, and I really do like Turner's Yellow, and it suits itself to a lot of the landscapes that we have around here. And then I used Titanium White, which I use for mixing quite a lot. So obviously I made my greys out of the 3 primaries there, and then added a little bit of white to go lighter and darker. So you could add a lot more colours than I have, obviously, and I do have a lot of colours. It's just that I like working with a limited palette to make up my various greys and browns of the landscape. And then you'll see at the end, once I completed this little sketch, I put a wash over the top with a different white, and that white's called a transparent white, which is something you can get in the Liquitex Soft Bodied Acrylics, and it's great because if you can imagine you've got a little bit of cloud going over distant hills, or you want to get a lot of distance and knock the tone back in the distance, just putting a little wash of that over can kind of knock your background back a bit, and give you that unified look as well, a bit of harmony across the whole thing, pulling the whole thing together. You'll see I put a little bit of pale yellow in the foreground over the foreground as well, just to sort of make the painting more harmonious at the foreground there. I did get a little bit too fussy at the foreground and faffed around a bit too much and overworked it, but then I'm going to try to correct that a little bit. So, but like I say, it's just a sketch. It's a tiny little sketch that I've done a little bit of scraping back, and you can layer them up. And that's the other thing, if you work quite quickly and you keep them quite moist, you can build the layers up and knock them back a bit with scratching out, etc., which is how I tend to work. So I hope that's been useful to you, having a look at me working with those Liquitex Soft Bodied Acrylics that you'll have seen me using in my own work. And as you can see, I use a flat brush throughout. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back with you again soon. Bye bye for now.